This movie is seen best on a big screen because of all the CGI and all the action. So being able to see it the way it is supposed to be seen is a blessing. So right now we're gonna, before we get into our Q&A, I'm gonna introduce our guest. His name is Leon Pridgen. If you would come to the stage, please. Leon. And you can give him a hand.
Yes, sir.
Have a seat. Have a seat. Leon Pridgen he's a veteran. He's a friend, first of all, and he's also a veteran TV, film, commercial, and theater actor, originally from Aberdeen, Maryland, and he currently resides in Mooresville, North Carolina. This guy has been on every TV show that you could think of, and I tease him all the time because I was like, every time I turn on the TV, I see you. Whether it's a commercial, you know, I mean, this guy has been on Queen Sugar, the show Nashville, P-Valley, Greenleaf, Homeland. It's like his credits just run off the page here. So his current project is a one-man theatrical tribute to General Benjamin O. Davis, who in 1954 became the first African-American general in the United States Air Force and was previously commander of the all-black combat units, the 99th Pursuit Squadron and the 332nd Fighter Group, or Red Tails, that we saw in the film. So welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome. So before we get started, we're going to show a short clip of his one-man show that he just recently did about 2 weeks ago. And if you could run that clip.
I'd like to see it. Cue the tape. That's neat.
In the 99th, went to his own private hell to wear those wings. Every one of those men carried not only the burden of their dreams of becoming American military aviators, but the hopes of an entire people as well.
Many of us, were familiar with the story of Red Tails, the Tuskegee Airmen. But I want to talk about some of the heroes behind that, and there were many, but one specifically, Benjamin Oliver Davis Jr. He was that first commander of Red Tails. And you understand the heroism of this man, the story behind how he got to be that guy, that man who could lead this group. He attended West Point from 1932 to 1936, a black man. In the 20th century, he was the first one in the 20th century. And during the 4 years that he spent at West Point, this esteemed military academy, he was silenced. Nobody ever talked to him. Other than an official order, maybe an occasional conversation, but for 4 years, he endured the rigors of that school with no friends, but it built a leader. And when you understand that story, you also have to understand where he came from. His father, his inspiration, Benjamin Oliver Davis Sr., was a general in the United States Army. Amazing accomplishment, but this is a man who joined the military, the Army, in 1898, enlisted, 30 years removed from slavery, and rose to the rank of general. That's the kind of inspiration that led Benjamin Davis to be who he was. And the heroics of World War II, it didn't end there. After that, he moved on to the Department of Transportation. He worked for the TSA, or the TSA as we know it today. That was built on his back, a black man. A story that's lost. He also worked for the Department of Transportation. And in working for the Department of Transportation, he also got the nickname Mr. 55. Mr. 55 because during the OPEC crisis, he was instrumental in implementing a national speed limit of 55 miles per hour. We not only saved gas, not only saved money, but it was instrumental in saving lives. That's Benjamin Oliver Davis, a Black man whose story has been lost that needs to be rediscovered.
Absolutely.
See, if Black men and white men could live, work, fight, and die together in a combat zone, why couldn't we be trained together here in the United States of America? What about me? My men, Red Tails.
Leo!
Pretty awesome. Wow. And what's the name of that piece, by the way?
It's called Benjamin Davis, Watch Him Fly.
Okay.
And it is a tribute and a homage to a hero of mine. The Red Tail story is something that I've been familiar with. I come from a military family. I served the military myself. And this particular individual, following Red Tails, studying about that, but one of the things I started to do is look at some of the individuals behind it. And his particular story, I just was drawn in. And he, not having any children, doesn't have a legacy. Well, he has a legacy, but he doesn't have children to tell that story. And like I said, it's something that's being lost, and something that I just wanted to make sure that, you know, while I took up some time, that I was going to make sure I told it. So
That's pretty awesome. And for those who may not know, his father was a general too. His father was the first black general.
he was the first Black general in the United States Army. He, as I said, he joined 36 years removed from slavery. Tried to go to West Point, was denied, obviously political reasons, but still was not going to be denied. And as an enlisted man, he rose in rank. They recognized that he understood military rules, understood protocols, and so he was promoted to, he went before a review board, sought a commission and received it, but the military at the time was still struggling with having a Black man in command of white troops. And so they would never let him command troops. And so for him, he was happier whenever he was assigned overseas, because at least he felt like a human being. And but as time went on, and as you know, we get to World War II, and President Roosevelt was making some different decisions about what they were going to do, and needed to integrate the military and start to have control or have officers who were trained and capable, because they were running out of people. And so he eventually was able to command troops, and so all of the things kind of fell in place for Ben to attend pilot training, which he was denied when he was at West Point in the top third of his class. Should have been able to decide to go anywhere he wanted to, and unfortunately was the instructor of military tactics at a Black college, and kind of history repeating itself. But like I said, the coming war led to the need for and instituting a Black flying unit, which he was the first commander of the 99th. And then from there, he took control of the 332nd. The history is just, you know, like I said, he's just an amazing individual. So
It really is. And just for context, we look at this movie, Red Tails. I don't know if many of you know, but prior to this production, there was a film called The Tuskegee Airmen. It was an HBO film, and the gentleman who portrayed Benjamin O. Davis Jr. in that movie was the great late actor Andre Braga, who we just lost about a month ago. Fantastic. And I thought it was interesting too that in Red Tails we didn't see the character Benjamin O. Davis. I believe there was a composite character created, which was the what is the actor's name?
Terrence Howard.
Terrence Howard, yeah, and his character was Colonel Bullitt in the movie, but he was considered, I guess, a composite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The story itself, none of the actual men who served in the 332nd or the 99th or part of the Red Tails, the Tuskegee Airmen story, I don't know if there was licensing issues, but they weren't actually depicted in this. And if you notice at the very beginning of the movie, it says inspired by true stories. And so it very much is that. It is a very, I think, phenomenal dramatic telling of some of the issues that are truth. But they had to take creative license to be able to tell that story. I think like I said, great job. The characters themselves kind of jump off the screen. You identify with. I think that they draw you in. I've heard a couple of people that maybe got a little choked up. Fortunately, I've seen the movie before, so but it is and George Lucas had 20 years prior to making this. He started the project. Number of different people to direct it at different times. Even Michael Schultz, who directed Car Wash, was actually supposed to be one of the first directors. But this sat on his mind and something that he wanted to do for quite a few years. And 20 years later, he finally was able to do Red Tails, and I think it did a phenomenal job.
He really did, and I thought it was also impressive that he was so determined to get this movie done that he put up his own money. We're talking about $93 million he spent, about $60 million for the actual production, and about over $30 million just to get it distributed. And it's interesting how Hollywood continues to not want to produce films like this, and sometimes you have to go outside of the system to make it happen. And to your point, I believe the project first came to him in 1988, and there were several, as you mentioned, several people attached. I think Samuel Jackson at one point was attached to the project, according to the Wikipedia. And
a lot of people at different times. Associated with or attached to.
Right.
So,
but the other part was that he didn't want to create. George Lucas didn't want to create a film that was an historical piece. He wanted to create an adventure film. And this film definitely checks all the boxes, because just between the CGI and
the visuals
and it just leaps off the screen, and we wouldn't see a film quite like this probably until Black Panther. In terms of the budget.
And like I said, there are a lot of historical accuracies. The 1,600-mile trek to Munich is something that, and like I said, the other thing that is so stellar about this is that all of the missions that they flew, they never lost a bomber. Never lost a single bomber. Because, as they were saying, you had people that were ready to go out and dogfight and wanted to check marks and say, I knocked down this plane. The discipline and the wherewithal for these men to be able to stay true to the mission and fight to make sure that they got everybody home is, and there were people who were trying to challenge that record. And they were saying that they wouldn't engage, but they got people home. They saved lives. As you said, knocking out one enemy aircraft, that's one pilot down. One bomber home is 10 Americans returned to their family. And they understood what the bigger picture was. and what the, like I said, just the heroism of that story alone is impressive. And then, like I said, when you start to whittle down and understand how certain individuals were able to be who they were, where they came from. You got a person who was on a farm one week and the next week he's in a plane flying. That's a huge jump. But understanding what was important, getting to that. And like I said, there are so many tremendous stories. You just can't tell them all. You just can't tell them all. It's amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So let's back up a little bit and talk about you. Talk about your journey, how you got into the business. Before I even met you, I saw a film called The Program, and he actually played Halle Berry's love interest in the film. That was about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But let's talk about your journey and what brought you through the industry up until this point.
I was a kid that found theater early, and I think I probably did my first play when I was in 3rd grade. Through middle school and whatnot, I played sports, a typical thing. But when I got to high school, I had a theater arts program, and this is when North Carolina actually used to have funding for arts, and it was a big thing. But I got a college level education in high school because my teacher was a working actress. So instead of saying, hey, you're gonna get on stage and go do this, I was studying Greek theater, I was studying Shakespeare at 15. I was building sets from ground up, learning everything I could about this craft. And so that was kind of the foundation. Fast forward, first couple of years out of high school, was in the military, and so decided I was going to jump out of planes for a little while. My father was a career soldier. That was kind of the thing that we did, and so that was that life, and what all of that entailed. And but I was still doing theater, still doing productions. I moved to Charlotte after I got out of the military, went to school, still, while I was studying business, I was still doing shows, doing some more things, and eventually, got into some, outside of theatrical production, started doing some films and television. And so that took me to New York for a little while and did As World Turns and some other things. And so it's just been a constant. Even when I've done other things in my life, it's always been something that I've been doing. And the other week, January 15th on MLK Day, we did a one-man show, Ben Davis Watch Him Fly. And so that now is the thing that we're really kind of standing on, because there was a good response. And so there are some things that we're working on and trying to bring it to some other places. And like I said, it was a tribute to Benjamin Davis, and obviously military bases, Army bases, Air Force bases, and they trained at Tuskegee. So historically black colleges, traditional colleges are kind of the market for what we're wanting to do. But there's some other things and thoughts that I have about how we will do this. And it is and not just a one-man stage play, just watching me for the hour and a half. It is 2 acts, but it is also, what I'm creating is a virtual experience, so that there are things that are happening and things that the audience is engaged in while I'm telling this story. And it is an honor to walk in those shoes.
I noticed in the clip, there's one scene where Benjamin O. Davis is very emotional, and he's literally yelling. Like, is that something that, did that come from you studying his background, or is that something that you use creative license to say, this is how he would have reacted in this situation?
Well, if I were to just tell his story, which is amazing, but there are some creative licenses I've taken from it. that one particular scene is when he realizes, or he gets the call that his father's passed away. As you can imagine, and one of the things about this is the story is Ben, the struggles, the things that he went through, the guiding force, his father, who had always been there. His mother died early, but he brought him to manhood. In the play, you know, when he first speaks about his father, he talks about this shadow and this thing that he cast and how he was this great being that everybody saw in the military and respected and regarded, and how he grew up in that shadow. But just like sometimes you have preacher's kids that feel like I'm not adequate because I'm not supposed to be, or what I should be, or what the expectation is. And these things that he felt is that moment of realizing that he was actually never in his father's shadow, but he was actually under the shelter of the wings of his father. And what that meant and why he was able to be who he was, because of the leadership, because of the impact of a black man on his son. So that's the kind of thing, that's the story that I'm trying to convey and tell in the midst of these heroics and these great things that he's done, and where he went not only prior to the military, because as you can imagine, what is it like for 4 years at an academy that is supposed to be raising leaders and nobody talks to you? Or if they do, they're not addressing you by Benjamin Davis, they're addressing you with some other colorful words. And so the metal that was formed to be able to make him the kind of leader that he is or was, to be able to lead those men and stay disciplined and stay true to making sure we get them home, to his post-military life of getting other people home because the speed limit is reduced to 55 miles an hour to save gas, but you're saving lives. So, like you said, he's just an incredible man for me.
Definitely some tall shoes that he had to fill. Did you pull any parallels from your own relationship with your father and being a military man and military son? Did you pull any parallels there to create this character?
Not so much. Well, there are a lot of great things that I think that I got from my father. But also, and this is just a little story, this is a little bit about me. My father, career military man, but my father was an alcoholic. So there are great things that I learned from him, not necessarily because of the actions he took, but because of the actions I could see, and I said, okay, I'm taking something from that. Now, don't get me wrong, love my dad dearly, but I made decisions about who I wanted to be based on some of the things I saw. So, good question.
Sure.
I didn't know if it was question and answer time, but if
Sure. Anytime.
If I don't ask it now, I'll forget. Your one-man play.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have it here in Charlotte? Did you do it in Charlotte or
It was.
theater?
We're looking to come here.
Oh, you haven't-
It was done in Mooresville,
Okay.
and there are some things and some information that we're going to be putting out. It was done at the Performing Arts Center in Mooresville, North Carolina. I used to serve on the school board there.
Okay.
And years ago, we were passing a bond so we could upgrade some facilities. Our auditorium, you could sit on the top row and look outside because it was falling apart. It was built in the 50s. And the gymnasium and some other things, but we passed that bond. And so I was proud to be able to do that on a building that has my name on it. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do the play there. It was open to the public. There was no charge because I wanted to see how it was landing with audiences and see how they responded. Thankfully, knock on wood, I'm glad it was very favorable. And we were able to pull together some of those virtual elements, some things that we look at there that we want to enhance. But I will say from a performance standpoint, I am very happy with what I brought to the table. This play was directed, I wrote it, essentially produced it so that we can get it up. But Karen Abercrombie, you may or may not be familiar with, but she actually directed, just helped me with cutting down some of the things and finding this show. But she and I, we did Heaven Sent. She was in the War Room. She is in Discarded Things. Many things. Wonderful actress, producer, writer, director, etc. extraordinaire. And also a very good friend. And but somebody that I trusted to be able to see, what my vision was, and then be able to find that show in it.
When is it coming to Charlotte?
If you got some money and some people we can talk to, no, we are trying to do something at the Booth Playhouse. That may be in October. There's a tentative thing that we're kind of discussing, but I'd like to do some other things sooner. And I probably will have some conversations with some people tonight to see what we can do. But yes, definitely looking to be able to get it on the road here, and then also, other areas across the country. And with military bases, you have military bases around the world. And
don't forget the schools.
Oh, no.
Elementary schools, children. I used to be a former teacher, high school level. I think this, every level from kindergarten to 12th grade needs to know about this, because I knew nothing about this man you're talking about. Absolutely nothing.
And to the point, that's one of the reasons why I want to push that word out, because he is, like I said, nationwide speed limit, 55 miles an hour.
Wow.
Where do you find that in the history books?
I
You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, when I was a kid, my mother used to give us these comic books. They were called Black Legacy. I don't even think they make them anymore. They were comic books, and that's who I learned about Crispus Attucks and Matthew Henson. And these are people that we didn't learn about in school. And if they ever do a reboot of that comic, I think that Benjamin O. Davis would just be a fantastic person to focus on.
Just something, to your point, things that we don't get to learn in school. Crispus Attucks, first person killed in the Revolutionary War. I saw that, said Crispus Attucks was the first person killed, and that's all. I did not realize Crispus Attucks was a black man for probably about 6-7 years beyond high school, when I started doing some reading and research on my own. Interesting how some things can get omitted.
That's why it's so important, this is Black History Month, but we should celebrate the contributions of African Americans all year round. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
Barring unusual circumstances such as an individual had military background in their families, their ancestors, what would you say would be the primary, if you can, motivation for some of these remarkable airmen doing what they did? Because my understanding is this was in an era when a number of African Americans had the attitude, after all, it was the height of Jim Crow and all that, and many of them said, why should I risk my life for a country that's not even respecting my basic civil rights? So I'm wondering if there's any insight as to why these remarkable men really came together to do with it.
Well, for me, my understanding, if you look at what was available at the time for African Americans in society and jobs that were available, the military for a lot of folks was a way out and a way up. Because one of the things that the military provided was VA housing. It was an opportunity for a lot of folks to find a way to home ownership. So, to an extent, yes, there was a level of patriotism, a belief of what can be, but for a large part, from my experience, it was a way up and to be able to participate in society. And home ownership is a path to wealth. And so now there were a lot of different stories that happened after the fact, after people came out of the military, and the educational opportunities that were supposed to be there for them, or the housing opportunities that were supposed to be there for them, didn't necessarily work out that way for a large majority of those veterans. But that was the belief and that was the desire to say, hey, there's not a job for me here. There's not an opportunity, because, like I said, Ben Davis, he couldn't get into pilot school. When he wanted to be a pilot, at the time, there was no opportunity for an African American to be a pilot in the country of the United States. There was no path. The military did provide him that. If you were a doctor, if you were a lawyer, and you happen to be African American, or a dentist, you could only practice that on this side of town. You couldn't be a person who could provide that service to everybody. So it was a way for them to figure out, how can I get from these poor streets in Louisiana, or I'm living in an urban society in New York, but how can I get out and get to something? And so for a lot of people, that was the belief.
And I also wanted to add too that when you look at the HBCUs and what the HBCUs produced, especially Tuskegee Institute, most of your lawyers, most of your scientists, most of your doctors all come from HBCUs. And as you saw, a lot of the pilots, they had other desires to do things once they got out of the military. Nate Parker's character, I believe he wanted to engineer and lawyers, so.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
So, related to that, were most of these guys from HBCUs, or could they become a candidate another way to qualify for the training? I mean, it must have been very hard to get accepted into pilot training.
There were, like I said, there were a number of different paths. Primarily, who had some engineering background, some type of mathematical background from a college. Most of them were college graduates. A lot of the folks who worked in maintenance and worked on the ground crews were people who may have or may not have gone to college. But like I said, there are also those examples of men who were, like I said, and I'm trying to remember if it was Chappie, but was on a farm one week and the next week he was flying. Now he may have messed around with some crop dusters and some other things, but there were people who made strides from backgrounds and areas that you would not have said this is a perfect candidate for a pilot. But the desire and then the fact that they were trained and they worked towards that, their training program was a phenomenal breeding ground for that success. And they understood it, and they were in Tuskegee, Alabama, in the midst of something where nobody really wanted them there. So.
And also to that, to your point, Eleanor Roosevelt was very instrumental in pushing that program to start at Tuskegee. So here you had, the wife of the President of the United States going to an HBCU and saying this is something that we need to help the African American community. So yeah, she was very instrumental in that too.
Yes.
I'm curious, did General Davis ever receive the recognition that he deserved
Oh yeah.
in his lifetime? I mean?
Yes, he did. As a matter of fact, even while they were in the military, just quick example, short story. Once he was, because the 332nd, the 99th was the first unit that he took over. Then he was called home to take command of the 332nd, and that's when they were threatening to disband the unit, talking about what they couldn't do. The story, this movie doesn't give you some of the other pieces of that, of the things that were happening and what they were doing before they got to the point where they were trying to dismantle them, saying, you know, at this point in 1944, they were just on the African coast flying strafing missions. They were taken out of combat because when they initially went over, they were already flying combat missions and proving themselves. And then when he took command of the 332nd, that's when they were fighting to keep it alive. Also, when he made a presentation to the Pentagon, Eleanor Roosevelt was also there, instrumental and supportive of what he was trying to accomplish, keeping that unit going, keeping it alive. But it was, like I said, it just was a constant ongoing battle to be able to say that this is what they're doing. He received, after the war in the Mediterranean and Italy came to an end, and they were still dealing with Japan, they were recognized, the unit itself was recognized, he individually was recognized, and they were talking about what they were doing. But then he came back to the United States because he was going to get the 477th up, train them so they could get them to combat so they could finish the war in Japan, was bombed. Then the atomic bomb ended the war and destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But when he came back to the United States, after being recognized, after them calling out and medaling him and decorating him, he was in Kentucky looking for housing for his officers so they could train these folks at the 477th to bring them over for the next leg of combat. And they had officers that didn't think that they were worthy of housing because it was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, living next to generals and colonels, and they felt like they didn't want them living next door to Coons. So no matter what, every time he took a step up and forward, there were these things that were a knockback. But through his life, and even from the standpoint fighting to integrate the military and the Air Force when it was formed, and he was recognized and has been recognized as one of the guiding forces of integrating the military. But again, you have to dig to find that information. But that is, you know, on a plaque at West Point where it says, yes, this graduate, this cadet, this honored student was instrumental in integrating the military. Okay. So yeah, it's like I said, it's a great guy.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that George Lucas, he used a lot of the gentlemen who were Tuskegee Airmen. He used them as consultants and advisors on this film. So the authenticity was very, very important. And even one of the Tuskegee Airmen's son was hired as the storyboard artist for this film. So I thought that was very, very important to stay as true to the story as possible. Are there any other questions? Sure.
So I'm interested to know, like, what are some of the other resources you pulled? I'm talking about your one-man production. What are some of the other resources you pulled in order to pull that story together outside of your friend that you mentioned? Was it Carmichael? I just wonder, like, how did you do your own research?
Oh yeah. No, there are several books on Ben Davis. One of the biggest ones that I leaned on was his own autobiography. You would find that like I said, Ben was a very intelligent individual. There's some things that I painted in the play that I've done just to make it a little bit more relatable, because I think that sometimes if I were to just go based on the facts and what you find on Wikipedia or the different novels that are written either about the Red Tails or him individually, you get this straight edge of who he is. And I think that sometimes if particularly when it relates to younger people looking at that, if they say, well, he had everything in order and I didn't, so I might as well not give it a shot. So there were different elements I tried to paint about him where he did have, or where I would imagine there would be some struggles, or outside of what's in the book or the books about him, what else might have been going on behind that? Because this is the story I want to tell, this is what I want you to know. But I've also had the fortune of being able to talk to some of his family members. And so being able to get that insight was invaluable, because yes, I can tell you all the great things and we just see that. And that's what I'm going to give you and what we're going to put in the book. But I kind of like to know what happened when he sat at home and drank a bourbon, and what the thoughts were having been in combat, and what that does to you, because this is also before time where we ever talked about PTSD. And what do you go through mentally when you are flying missions and destroying and killing? Not necessarily a natural thing, it's not what you're supposed to do. So some of that weighs into the fabric of trying to understand what that psyche may have been.
Awesome. Well, I think we can wrap up this conversation if there's no other questions. Follow this gentleman if you're on social media, Leon Pridgen. We're looking for great things to happen for the show. What's the name of it again?
Ben Davis, Watch Him Fly.
Watch Him Fly. So if you Google that, everything should come up on that. Follow this man, and if you happen to do any crowdfunding or anything like that, we will definitely be there and support you, sir.
Hey, like I said, we're having some conversations and some things that may help to get this to a different level. It's just, like I said, it's not just a stage play. I like to bill it as a stage experience, because, like I said, I've seen a lot of one-man shows, different ways of telling stories and that type of thing, but the little bit of an interactive piece and the thing that happens, and the big dreams of where I would like to be able to drop a P-51 Mustang, that's coming. So, but we need a big space for that.
There you go. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. Please continue to follow all of the programming for Black History Month here at the Independent Picture House. Thank you, Leon, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem at all. Anytime. You guys have a great night.